So beautifully put by Dr. Goodall. Help me in welcoming Lovelda Vincenzi, who is your host for the next, and the very first, I should say, plenary session. Lovelda. Oh, no.
Thank you. Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. We're here today for the first opening session. As you can tell by the way that we're set up, this forum is very much designed for a collaborative conversation. And there'll be lots of opportunity for us to ask questions of the panelists. But unfortunately, the opening plenary is not one of those. What you will see is that we have a QR code that you can use to engage in the conversation. And you can do that whether you're here in the room or whether you're watching us live online. And the team will be having a look at those to be able to respond. So if you periodically see those a QR code on the screens, feel free to scan it so that you're able to engage in the conversation. We couldn't start this forum without first describing and talking about what the challenges are and laying the groundwork for the conversations that are going to proceed. Soils are a very important part of our ecosystem and one that we do need to dive into more and look after. But it is important that we ensure that we all have exactly the same understanding of what we mean by living soils before we get started. So, to assist me with that conversation, people who are far smarter than me in this arena, please, I would like to welcome my panelists for this conversation. It will be Sandrine Summers, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Moet Hennessy, Pascal Bovin, who is Professor and Dean at the Agronomy Facility at the University of Applied Science in Western Switzerland, as well as President of the ECSSS, that is the European Confederation for Soil Science and Societies. I'll also be inviting Ronald Vargas, who's the Secretary of Global Soil Partnerships at the Land and Water Office for the Food and Agriculture Organization, known as the FAO. And finally, Dr. Chris Nichols, a Research Director at Myland Company. Please give a warm round of applause for the panelists. If you can join Sandrine. Hello, welcome.
Hello.
You can breathe, it's okay. They're a friendly bunch around here. We're not here to have too many challenges here. Maybe if you just let them know, it's fine. Some of them are looking a little bit nervous. It's okay, we're friendly, right? It's a friendly bunch. So a little bit more about each of the panelists just before we dive in. So firstly, Sandrine is responsible for overseeing the Moet Hennessy sustainability strategy for the 25 wine and spirits maisons. So welcome, Sandrine. Pascal, we know, is doing a lot of stuff from a scientific perspective, but is also the former editor and former editor of several editorial brands of journalists in soil science, as well as author of over 70 international journals and articles covering a range of topics around soil science. And then Ronald is a soil scientist for over 20 years. Hello and welcome, Ronald. And has over 20 years' experience in resource management with a focus on sustainability in soil. And last but not least, we've got a soil microbiologist for over 25 years, and with over 25 years of research experience, as well as the co-author of over 25 peer-reviewed publications, Dr. Chris. So welcome to the room. So this forum, as we know, is dedicated to soil and talking about living soils, and that forms the basis of our conversation over the next 2 days. But it kind of would make sense that we take a little bit of time, Pascal, to really understand what we mean by the term living soils. What does it mean?
It works. Well, as you know, probably the soil is not a living body, so that's anthropomorphic, of course, and to that extent, it's a very good way of communicating. In science, we are rather talk of soil quality, which is the ability of the soil to fulfill all these functions. And one of the functions is to support life on Earth. So that's a very important function, and all of the functions are connected. So living soil is soil, and healthy soil is a soil which is able to support these functions, and in particular, life on Earth.
So the soil itself is not alive. What we're talking about is its ability to support life within the soil.
Yes.
Fantastic. And what is the current state of our soils? So if what we're saying is when we're talking about living soils, what we mean is all the microorganisms that are within the soils actually being present. When we look at our soils at the moment, what is the current state of our soils, and what factors do you feel have really contributed to the position that we currently face?
Well, since it's not a living body, it's not crying, and we have been impacting it a lot everywhere. So you have, of course, extension of urban areas, you have pollution, and you have many other degradation features that happen almost worldwide. Some of them you can see, some of them you don't see, and probably they are the worst one. So you have the loss of organic carbon, which is, of course, now on the top range of the questions because it's impacting the climate, or it can impact positively the climate issue, but many other things like erosion, compaction, erosion. I know there are some specialists of also oceans and seas, and they can explain why it is very dangerous for the ocean and the seas. And so you have many factors. All the soil functions are interconnected, and they are the cornerstone of most terrestrial ecosystem services. So, of course, when you impact it, it's impacting it everywhere. Arable land, in general, is deeply impacted. It's not only that we lose soil by mineralizing, by building new urban areas, but also we impact it with the practices, the cropping practices we have adopted worldwide since the middle of 20th century.
And Chris, what do you see as some of those practices, and is it different in the US in terms of the state of the soils in the US versus the state of the soils that we see in Europe?
Well, I think that, it's important for us to understand the wide diversity of practices that are used both in the US and globally across various types of scales of farms, as well as different types of commodities that are being produced. So we have a large diversity of practices, but we have a lot of options, I think, to be able to unite those practices in a way in which we can focus on regenerating the soil and regenerating the biological community that's in the soil. When I think of soils, by definition, it's carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen bound to sand, silt, and clay. And so, as Pascal said, it's not living itself, but it comes from life and is part of that whole cycle of life, both above ground and below ground. And that wide diversity of community of microorganisms that we see there that Dr. Goodall talked about continues to fascinate me all the time, even after having done more than 25 years worth of work looking at those microorganisms. They're incredibly complex and intricate and beautiful and wonderful. And I'm happy to be here. Hopefully, that we can look at how we can help to respect those organisms even further.
And how are we not respecting them at the moment? What practices, what are we seeing in terms of, are they still there? Have we managed to get rid of some of them? And how have we got there, if at all that's the case?
So we have really decreased the diversity of some of the microorganisms in a lot of our soils. They are very resilient, and so it's not a case where we can really completely eliminate them. And so a lot of times what I look at is, the idea of if you build it, they will come. Mm-hmm. So we need to be creating a favorable environment for them to be able to grow and regenerate. In the US, we currently are talking about erosion and loss of soil. In the US, we currently lose about 1.7 billion metric tons of topsoil every year. When we put in practices and policies like the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, we were able to reduce that by about a third. But over the recent years, as there has been more intense pressure on producing more food, instead of that number continuing to go down, that number has started to creep back up again. And so I think that there are, again, options and opportunities for us, and really grateful to be here because I think we can look at those options and opportunities to find ways to now be able to utilize those various practices that are going to help to regenerate that and restore that and still maintain the productivity that it is that we're looking at. We're not looking at a trade-off. We're looking at a trade-off analysis, but it's not losing one in order to be able to have healthy soil.
So I'm hearing that erosion of the soils is a big thing, and that's a major contributing factor. And part of what's contributed to that is the way that we've been farming. Ronald, what have you seen to be the current state of our soils, and what's your assessment of how we've got here?
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I want to first congratulate and thank Moet Hennessy for organizing this very timely event, because giving a voice to a resource that is invisible is quite challenging, particularly if it comes from the private sector. Now, why I'm saying this is because definitely currently soils are in the global agenda, and that comes from a lot of work in the past years. Why? Because unfortunately, during the discussions for making decisions that will have impact at national but also at local level, soils was completely absent. Why? Because it is very clear we are standing on it. We don't see it, we don't value it, so those who know that food is produced on soils, maybe they know a bit, but others do not. Now, if you talk about what are the main challenges, we have 10 degradation types that are affecting our global soils, no matter if you are in a developing region or in a very developed country. Erosion continues to be number one, but there are many other degradation types, including, for instance, soil pollution, the loss of soil biodiversity, organic carbon, which is important. And that is, of course, an issue, because we need to consider that currently we are post-COVID and we are facing other issues, right, socially, that are going to affect dramatically the agricultural sector. Mm-hmm. Just for you to know that there are predictions that there will be a food crisis very soon in Africa, for instance. Why? Because with COVID and the current ongoing problem, there is a shortage in terms of all the inputs that you need for agriculture. No matter the type of agriculture we are talking about, because at the end of the day, what we are talking about is that soils are used for producing food, and you know, food is very important for all.
So you mentioned Africa. We've spoken a little bit about the US market versus the European market. When we say the soil is eroding, is it the same, are we experiencing the same impacts everywhere? Can we lump this into, this is what the problem is and this is how it looks? Or does it appear differently depending on geographies? What sort of considerations do we need to have, Pascal?
Yeah, in terms of soil quality, the factors are not the same worldwide. So you have to make distinction, of course, depending on the soil types, depending on the regions, depending on the type of cropping systems, and depending also on the structure of the farming systems. So it has to be adapted. We have a general framework, we have general rules, we have general findings on soil degradation and soil preservation or restoration, but one very important point to recall is that you have to adapt on any site the way you make the diagnosis, the way you evaluate the potential of the soil, the distance between the potential and the real state, and why, because of which kind of practices, and which kind of practices can you adapt with these farmers and this type of farming systems. All these things you have to adapt. This is probably something very difficult to handle for the global corporates, but that's the reality. And there is a huge potential of improving, but provided that you take this into account.
I'm going to ask a follow-on question there, and maybe like a stupid question. Why does it need to be adapted? Just from a scientific perspective, why can't we take the same thing and apply it everywhere? Is this not an opportunity at all?
Well, I give you maybe a very simple example. In some soils, like in temperate region, when you have clay, as you said, organic matter is bound to clay, you can have a lot of organic matter, and this becomes the main factor of soil quality. If you go to sub-Saharan region, it's sandy, it's dry, it's hot, organic matter is eaten by microorganisms very fast, you cannot store a lot of carbon. The soil quality depending on other factors. So for that reason, for example, you have to adapt. Another reason is the farming system. Are you working with smallholders? Are you working with big farms? Are you in a very diversified system, or are you in a monoculture system? All these things you have to take into account. It's just like any kind of industry in the end. You don't deal the same with car industry and plane industry and so. And this diversity, maybe you ignore it, but it's in the cropping system.
So we can't just look at agriculture or viticulture and say, here's how we apply things. We have to look at different ecosystems and start to think about the application in different sorts of ecosystems.
Yeah, which means we have to change our paradigm. We tend to think into product and into very linear thinking, and we have to introduce systemic thinking. And it works, at least as much as at the first one, but it is different. And if we stand on the line to look at quick fixes that we can apply worldwide, we will fail. While we have the power to change the things, but we have to adapt our thinking. And that's very interesting. I think that's a very important societal challenge of the moment.
So we have the power to change, but we have to adapt the way that we look at those changes. Dr. Chris, how do you see the international, I mean, we could almost look at the US and say, oh, it's one continent, surely it's all the same.
Well, and again, you know, the wide diversity that we have with the different soil types, even in the U.S., and the different types of crops. So we're looking at, you know, perennial crops versus annual crops, how to be able to put these things together. And I think that there are some uniting principles in soil health and regeneration of soil, but those principles, the tools that we put into place and the practices that we put into place are all going to be variable. And they're going to be variable not just by, you know, the crop and not just by the soil type, but also by the individual farmer. Mm-hmm. Farmers, you know, in order for us to be able to engage and be able to grow this type of a movement, we really need to have the farmers buy-in and being able to have the farmers supporting all of this. And so we need to be able to be looking at that complexity and what the farmers can do and what they can't do. So having those individual relationships on some level with the farmers is, very, very important for us to be able to do. So I think that there are, you know, all of these diversity of options that we can put into place. And as I said, I always think of it more as we're not in a place that is, we are in a critical place, but we have options and opportunities. There's a lot of things to be able to continue to grow and have hope that's out there.
Fabulous. Ronald, do you think that the soils are impacted the same globally, or do we see that even though we talk about erosion, actually what erosion looks like in different places is different?
Well, the erosion is, for instance, as I said, is the #1 degradation type because it occurs everywhere due to the causes. One of them is rain. So a basic example is after a rainfall, go and see the rivers around you, around your city or your place. If you see the water is dark, is brown, that is soil coming up from many places, whether if they are agriculture or not, it is erosion and we are losing it. So the responses are, of course, different because some countries have more means than others to tackle the issue. But erosion has been there for many years and will continue to be there for many years because it's also part of a natural process. For instance, these days in Europe, in Rome, we are there and then sun is coming up instead of rainfall. Why? Because that sun is coming up from the Sahel, and that's wind erosion. Okay, what are we going to do? We need to be positive because there are solutions, many solutions, very new ideas of how to tackle erosion and with different communities because the principles for managing soils are, I know there are innovative ideas, etc., but more or less are the same. But the application is different because culture of people is different everywhere. And that's the value of all this world. That's the diversity we have. So we need to have different solutions for all these problems. But definitely, we need to find a joint solution because we need to bring together governments because it is their responsibility to ensure that our environment, our natural resources are as we got them from nature. And of course, the users also have a responsibility, the consumers have a responsibility, the private sector, all of us have a role to play. And I think that is the only way in which things will work. Otherwise, isolated responses will have a response that will be short-term because the problem will come back again.
So I'm hearing we need collaborative approaches with lots of different parties. There isn't, whilst the principles that we can apply to the problem are the same across the board, the actual application should be adjusted for the soil, for the environment, for the culture, which I think is an important perspective that sometimes is missed out, the cultures that you're dealing with, the individual farmers. And you mentioned a really good point there about it needs to be an approach that's global. So Sandrine, I want to bring you in at this point. From how important do you think it is that companies such as Moet Hennessy, with such a large global footprint, who's able to experience the diversity of the impact as well as the diversity of the solutions, how important do you think that it is that you're considering soil sustainability? And why do you think it's particularly important in the wines and spirits industry?
As you mentioned, Lovelda, with Moet Hennessy, we have some maisons all over the world, and we have different climate, different type of soils, different practices, different know-how, different mindset with our people. So, in fact, we have this diversity, and soils, is crucial, and we are dependent on soil. Every maison, every product are dependent on soils. This is the reason why, in our sustainability program, Living Soil, Living Together, the first pillar is regenerating soils. We really place it at the heart of our strategy. So in fact, what does it mean? It's not new. We have been working for reducing our environmental impact for a long time. All our maisons all over the world, we have environmentally certified with the relevant certification on each country, to decrease our environmental impact. And our challenge is to involve our partners, our growers, our farmers to do the same. So this is our first challenge, and we have already started it. The second challenge is to go further. As we explained, is now to have a positive impact, to regenerate, and to regenerate soils particularly. And we have decided to test a lot of solutions with our different maisons. And we need some experts to do that. So, we are working with Nature, with Reforestation, with PADV, with Pure Projet, in order to test and learn different solutions. It could be cover cropping in our vineyards with our Champagne maison or with Galoupet maison, with Chandon. We test different spaces on different surface, and we measure. Measurement, this is very important and not so easy. I think we will see in these 2 days how it's difficult to measure and to have the right KPI, to go further. So we test cover cropping. I think it's already a good solution. We test agroforestry, so to put some edges, some trees around our vineyard and cross the vineyard. And for example, with Ruinart, with Hennessy, we tested that again. We measure with our partner in order to see the benefits and then to go further. And of course, we push biodiversity everywhere. Biodiversity is crucial, macro biodiversity, but micro biodiversity as well. So we continue to create what we call ecological corridor. For example, with Moët et Chandon, we have a great program to plant some hedges all over the region. This is very important, to combat nature, to combat insects, to combat birds. We will talk about that with these 2 days as well. Very important. So, in fact, we have decided to test a lot of solutions, different solutions, in order to see the benefits, thanks to our experts. And then we want to involve, of course, our partners.
I love that Moet Hennessy is taking a leading role in this, pulling together a forum like this, for example, but also the tangible steps that you're taking within the organization. And rather than, we're talking about the complexity of protecting our soils. And so I love the notion that we're just testing lots of different things. We don't exactly know what the answer is. Why do you think it's so important in the wines and spirits industry in particular that protecting our soils becomes something that's much more of a core pillar for other organizations in this space?
Again, we are depending on soils. We have no choice, you know, for the prosperity, for the quality of our product, even more, you know, to be sure that young generation want to continue to work with them. I think it's very important. We really have to place, and we are doing for a long time, for this subject. And maybe something which is very important, we have to continue to educate, to raise awareness. You know, as we understand, soils are a complex ecosystem. We have to understand it, and we have to train everybody. And this is the reason why, you know, I really insist always to say we have to understand, and to understand, we have decided to develop a new tool of training called the Living Soils Workshop. And it's, you know, like the climate fresque for those who know this type of tool of training. It's a pedagogical tool, you know, with some cards, and then you understand what is soils, how it works, and what is the threats of soils, and what are the solutions. Mm-hmm. And then you have different cards, you play with the cards, and at the end, after 1 hour, you understand better what is soils. And we have developed this tool with our partner Spark News and Ludisoli. And I encourage you to test this tool, because we just finished it and we present this tool during this forum, during the launch session we organize. Then you can test it. And what we want is to, of course, collect your feedbacks, your comments, to adjust this tool, and then to give this tool as an open source for everybody. So it will be tested, of course, with our people, all our people, but it would be fine, you know, to test in every companies, with partners, with suppliers, with school. I think it's very important, again, to educate and to learn more about soils, about what we don't see, but just so important.
So education's an incredibly important, crucial component. But what we also know is sometimes education takes a little bit longer, and one of the things that gives us all a bit of a boot is a bit of legislation. A good bit of government legislation gets everybody moving along a lot quicker. So as well as the company's perspective, what's the vision from the FAO, and what sort of global governance do you think we need, Ronald, to be able to get better quality decision making? Education's great, but it might just take a little bit longer. Sometimes that governance, that external governance, is what we need. What do you think that should look like?
Well, last week we had the annual meeting with the countries who are members of FAO, plus our partners. We come together every year to make decisions about what to do, and the first decision that countries did is that by 2030 we should aim to have 50% of our global soils managed sustainably. So that's a huge commitment already. Of course, you can commit to many things, but how we measure that you are really doing it? So we are trying to have targets and indicators so that every country can report, what you did, you committed to this, what you are going to do now. Now, of course, all this is not obligatory, it's not binding, because it is quite difficult to get that. But we should move out from that. And that is part of understanding why you need soil governance. So sometimes we confuse with legislation, and we have a tool called SoilX that is trying to analyze all the legislation on soils that are there. And we did an assessment, and approximately, for instance, 19 countries around the world have a specific soil law, okay? But soil is cross-cutting, because it can be part of agriculture, it can be part of environment or forestry or mining or urban areas, etc. So soil is always mixed there. But purely as a law, very few countries have a law on soils. So definitely, if you want to have governance, governance means that you are really taking care of this resource, and you are investing, you are putting rules, you are working with the sectors that are using this resource, in this case soils, but you also need science, you need measurements, evidence, because you need to make decisions. And particularly in soils, you can measure many things in order to monitor if the soil quality or soil health, or you can call it, because there are always different names for basically the same, you need evidence if you want to manage properly this resource. So governance means that someone at country level need to take the leadership in ensuring that this resource is managed and used properly. So if we don't have legislation, it means that we need to start also from there, because otherwise, how you get resources to invest, how you get the policies, how you get the institutions to support to get this data and information. And also, education is part of it. Yes, what we need to teach our children is not to get them panic about that the future will disappear because climate change. No, we need to tell them about the beauty that nature offers us, including soils, full of life there, but we don't see it. And that they need to understand that if this soil is good, our food will be good and we will be also healthy. Otherwise, if we just give wrong messages, then these people who in the future can be those deciding the future of your country will not be aware of it, or will be a bit reluctant to do something. Therefore, as you can see, we need leadership at national level, and that should come, of course, from those who are ruling the country, and the governance should start there. But citizens nowadays that have access to all information should be aware of what is soil, why it's important for us beyond food, because we value what we see and what we touch, but we need also to understand that soil is full of carbon, that soil plays an important role in climate change mitigation, etc. Then they will be the ones putting pressure on us in order to take action. Otherwise, if we just think about formal education, it will not work at all.
You mentioned a really good point there about raising awareness, and I think we can agree most of the people here in this room at least have some awareness around soil and the importance that it plays. Albeit here to get deeper understanding, there's at least a baseline of understanding and an acknowledgement that looking after our soils is a good thing to do. But how do we spread that awareness beyond the industry, beyond the sector, beyond the activists? Dr. Chris, how do we get this out to a wider audience?
Well, I think, we have a lot of opportunities. We have, again, this conference is being viewed live globally, and so we have a lot of opportunities to be able to share information and to access information. And I was honored to be a part of a documentary called Kiss the Ground, and there are a number of documentaries that are out there that are talking about this information about our soils and being able to get people involved. And I think too, I want to step back a little bit talking about, the role of wine and spirits in this and the opportunity that exists there, because I think as a microbiologist, when we're looking at the wine and spirits industry, as Dr. Goodall mentioned, we don't think about microbiology or about soil, and we don't understand that because we can't see those microbes. But in the wine and spirits industry, microbes are essential to wine and spirits production. So you already have that context. And so again, in an education format, to build upon the context and the information that you already have, because although you can't see them all the time, you understand that importance. I think the other thing where wine and spirits industry can help to lead is this idea of the connection of the soil to the quality of the products that you're producing, to the flavor and texture and smell, all of those components. And what we've done for the food that we eat, we take that into account when we're looking at wine and spirits and when we're looking at things like coffee and teas, but we don't take that into account when we're talking about the food that we eat. And so again, getting that education and context there where we can now talk about the fact that, I say in the United States, there are very few people who actually know what a tomato tastes like. I would say that that is true also in the EU. We don't understand the flavor and the texture. And we've gotten an industry that's been involved in this because of trying to feed a large number of people. So we harvest fruits and vegetables before they're ripe and before they can get those phytochemicals that are important to the texture and the quality and the taste and the smell. And that comes from that interaction with that soil microbial community. And we'll ship them and expose them to gases and to other things to try and get them to ripen. But that doesn't take into account what those microbes are giving them. So even though we understand the chemistry of the ripening process, we don't understand all of the biochemistry. And so again, trying to engage with people on the level that they're at, working on documentary like Kiss the Ground, being able to engage more, that engages a lot with consumers. It doesn't always engage well with farmers. So figuring out different mechanisms to be able to engage with these other groups, and again, having that foundation from where it is that you're starting.
Kiss the Ground is an incredible documentary. I actually watched it in the lead up to this, and it's one, if you haven't watched it, I'd strongly recommend that you take a look. It's about 90 minutes, it's on Netflix, really easy for you to access. Great one to watch and then just recommend to other people so you don't have to educate them. You just tell them, go watch this. I gave my husband the 15-minute download of it, and he now feels like he's an expert in this space. He does. I can also confirm. See, my husband's educating me on a lot of things. Italians love their tomatoes, and tomatoes do not taste the same in England, just to add to that. They don't. He likes to come here, and then he's like, oh, they taste really good in the south of France. South of France, south of Italy, great tomatoes. I digress. I think it is important we dive deeper into how we can raise soil awareness, and I'm also just conscious that this conversation is going a little bit faster than I thought it would, or we're covering ground a lot. We're running out of time, let me just put it that way. But Pascal, what do you think also needs to be done around awareness in terms of how do we get this message to more people? You've got the scientific know-how in the background. How do we get more people to understand the importance of this?
Well, that's indeed the key question. We have to promote this awareness and along the value chains and larger, I think. Everybody should know what happens with soil, and that most people's activities are impacting the soil. When you just choose to buy potatoes that are egg-shaped and with a smooth yellow color, you decide to destroy the soil. Mm-hmm. Because then you need no soil structure and no organic carbon to get this. And you don't know. So that's very, very important. This is a very simple example, but that's very important. And that's also a key question for companies, inside companies, because otherwise you may fall in traps by just buying some quick fixes, as I said, and saying, oh yeah, they're going to solve the problem. But there is hierarchy in the problems. Biodiversity is very important. Biodiversity is the result of many other actions you have to take. So it's very important to understand this, to hierarchize, to get the right roadmap. So for these reasons, these fundamental reasons, you need awareness. And then in the end, you are dealing with farmers, and each farm is an enterprise, different one from the other, with a different history. So if you don't know this and you just apply a worldwide solution, it will just fail, as it failed in many other opportunities with environmental management in agriculture. And we can work with this. This is not a weakness. I mean, this is a strength, but we have to understand that. So companies have to increase their awareness, and they have to collaborate on that. First, as it was said in the introduction, companies are actors, and they can go much faster than public decision. They can anticipate also consumers' awareness and so on. They can promote it. They can help that. And it's going to be received, because in the minds, everybody is changing. But it has to be now clear, including in the what you're buying in the shops and what you're doing worldwide. Well, there is another reason, is that if companies are not collaborating, you can work on sugar, you can work on wine, you can work on many things, but they are associated in the land management, they're associated in the rotations. And it's not only the companies who are working on the value chain, say food chain, for instance. Think to the insurances working on flood hazard. They may take some initiatives that are contradictory with some others, from other actors. They will put a lot of money on the table, and they will lose their money, and everybody will lose its money. You can put much less money, but coordinate, because in the end, it's the same territory and the same actors and the same factors that you can promote, if provided that you work with the farmers and they understand and they think this is their interest also. So there are many reasons to develop this awareness, to be capable of doing this rather than just saying, okay, I fix it all with this way. It's not true. I mean, remote sensing, new sensors, new technology, data science, each of these things are very useful. But please, at low noise, our first new technology is to be capable of sharing this awareness and working with that.
So we need a coordinated, collaborative approach.
Yeah, because it's going to be coordinated or it's going to fail.
Coordination or fail, you've heard it here first. Ronald, really quickly, you've got the World Soils Day and the Soils Doctor Program. Can you tell us very quickly a little bit about it? Because we're definitely running low on time now.
Thank you. Well, World Soil Day is a UN World Soil Day that is celebrated every 5th of December. And, well, we started celebrating since from 2014, and I can say that is one of those days that is becoming one of the most observed. And in there, our focus is really to use art as the vehicle to bring soils into the knowledge of people. And art is a very good vehicle, and now we are in this city, so you can imagine art is really helping us a lot, and we try to involve as much as we can children and civil society. We launch many contests, photography, videos, etc., and it's really moving forward. So I hope all will join in this World Soil Day, because if you like soil, then that's the day in which we need to raise the voice. Soil Doctors is basically a tool in order to have farmers becoming the soil doctors of their own soils, trying to see the soil health of their soils and trying to communicate that in their community. A soil doctor is a leader in the community who knows how to detect the problems on their soils and how to bring solutions, particularly in the absence of extension services, because many countries do not have these services, so farmers are alone. Someone needs to help them out, and soil doctors are for that.
Fantastic, thank you. I know we're going to go over slightly, but I think it's really important, Sundarine. How do people get the most out of this forum? We've put a lot of effort into bringing people together. How do you encourage people to make the most out of the time we have?
I think my main message is sharing everything, sharing questions, sharing mistakes, sharing knowledge, sharing concrete initiatives, and use this network, this fantastic community. You know, we exactly wanted that with Philippe. You know, to gather different profile from different industry. So it's very important that we can share to go further and to go faster.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for your support and for your shares and opening up this session today. Can we please give them an incredible warm round of applause?